When people say brand positioning, like, what does that mean to you?
Taylor Swift does it phenomenally well. You know, she wants to reinvent. She feels like as a female artist, she has to turn up and be new each time. And we go with her on that journey because we trust her kind of underlying value. So this is a, you know, deliberate tactic, and it's working very, very well.
Welcome to the Stay Independent podcast, your space for tangible, actionable ways to build an independent artist career. Today, we're walking through the top 5 most common branding mistakes made by new artists. To help us navigate this journey, our guest today is a brand consultant who comes from the branding agency world in London and worked on CeCe Winans' Grammy award-winning album, Let Them Fall in Love. Please welcome James Muriel.
Hey, Kirk, how you doing?
Hi. Good to see you. We've already been talking for 30 minutes, but...
That's true. But it's a pleasure to reestablish that we...
Yes, man. And thank you for being here today. James has been a friend of mine for a while, so it's cool to like share some of his knowledge. Let's dive right in. What do you feel like the stakes are of an artist not considering their brand?
I think it's interesting because having come from corporate branding world where obviously it's kind of like the first thing that people think about. When I came to Nashville 12 years ago or so, it was really interesting to me to see sort of artists on all levels that hadn't really they were kind of intuitively finding their brands. And some were doing it incredibly well, and then others were sort of fumbling into it, or kind of stumbling blindly through it, hoping for the best. And so I really just I found that really confusing for me from where I'd come from, where realistically, if you didn't know what you were going to be communicating as a brand or what your positioning was, then you were sort of destined to create real problems for yourself further down the line. And I think that, artists can sometimes kind of intuitively get away with it. But I think what I tend to see is the ones that are the most intuitive tend to rise to the top. And the ones that actually, it's not always an intuition. If you understand the playing field, then it helps enormously. So once you've got your head around how to build your brand, then suddenly everything changes for you. You can actually really go full throttle into your messaging and make it all happen, basically.
Something that I feel like I've wanted this podcast to be is a space to look at other industries and take their best practices and apply them to an artist's business or career. And I mean, what I hear you saying is like pretty much in every other corporate area of business, or like that's what people start with. They start with like thinking about their brand and defining that, positioning it. And it seems like a step that, and I've seen this as well in my experience doing content with artists, feels like a step that a lot of artists skip. Have you found the same?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't think it's an artist's fault necessarily, because honestly, it's, until you kind of see how branding works, it's quite, why would you know what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing? All you've got is the playbooks that you're being, experiencing through other artists. And quite often the ones you'll notice are the ones that have the enormous budgets behind them. Right. As an indie artist or as an up and coming artist, it's sort of not necessarily something that you would know how to even approach. And you would assume that someone's going to help you along the way with it. Quite often I think, through some artists, there was a sort of assume that you'd get to a label and they would help you with this. But the reality of kind of perhaps where labels are these days is more that you kind of have to have your own audience and have everything kind of lined up, and then
you have to have it established already.
Yeah, exactly. And they add rocket fuel to it, and they'll refine it, and they'll really sort of be able to take it to another level. But but not necessarily, doing it for you.
Right.
Really.
It may be important, just starting off here, to define a couple terms. When you hear this word brand, what does that mean? What is a brand?
What is a brand, indeed? So yeah, that's kind of like something I usually kind of go through in branding workshops, and quite often I've been in branding workshops where marketing people just kind of freeze up and go like, "Oh crap, I don't know, logos and stuff." And so, but
I feel like that's right there. That's what a lot of people think of. They think, that's my logo.
No, exactly, and it is. Yeah, I mean, a logo is part of it, perhaps, but actually, I feel like the best definition of a brand really is actually a quote from Maya Angelou that says, "They'll forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." And that basically is, for me, the most succinct kind of way of thinking about it. It's kind of like a promise of an experience. And so, like, if we think of a brand that we all know, like Apple or something like that, my experience of Apple is likely to be very much the same experience that you've had with Apple. And then if we were to imagine, I gather that they stopped doing it, but they were at one point they were working on a car project or something like that. But if we were both to be sort of sat in a room independently and to describe what we think the Apple car might be like, we'd probably come up with pretty similar kind of ideas. Yeah. And that's because of their brand being so consistent in terms of how it comes across, the kind of materials, the kind of colors, the kind of functionalities, and all of the kind of emotional experiences that we've had. And so, it's basically a kind of about building a picture that everyone can kind of commonly understand. Yeah. If that makes sense.
I've heard it said, if Nike decided they were going to build a hotel, you would have an idea of what that might look like. But if Marriott were to do a shoe, you probably you would maybe struggle to picture that. And that's because
are we talking JW Marriott or Marriott Courthouse here? I feel like they'd be different, right?
That's true. Yeah, I don't even know.
One of them would have breakfast on it.
To my point, I feel like a lot of hotel brands are commodities. They're more or less replaceable by each other, and it's more about maybe like convenience or price, whereas a brand competes on ideas and
you could also argue with hotels, it's sort of a kind of imagined competition as well, because the hotel groups are actually so big now that they're not really actually competing with anyone but themselves, really. But yeah, I mean, maybe that's deliberate. I don't know. So,
what do you when people say brand positioning, like, what does that mean to you?
So brand positioning is really sort of understanding your lane. So obviously, we see so many different types of brands, and we see so many different types of communication, and different pieces of sort of brand communication will affect us in different ways at different times of day and different, situations, really. But it's not to say that kind of, you need to be all of those different things in your brand. So realistically, it's about sort of, if you know what your brand is and where you'd like to be, and knowing that it's come from a place that you can authentically back up and it is authentically you, then it kind of plants a flag and it allows people to come to you rather than, you having to kind of go and get them so much. It's sort of really about kind of being able to communicate to people like how you fit into their lives, like you somehow are connecting to them on an emotional level, because people use brands as a way to bridge gaps between who they are and who they imagine that they'd like to be. So quite often we think of this as a kind of tension between where we are right now and then this sort of ideal self that we have, which drives a certain car, has a certain house, has a certain dog, goes on holiday in certain places or what have you. And that sort of gap between those two things is a tension that brands can try and fill in. So I always give the example of like when when I was starting out in my job, and I'd gone straight from university straight into kind of corporate world. But I really wanted to kind of explore the world, and I'd been watching like Ewan McGregor on his motorcycle going through the Road of Bones in like Siberia and Mongolia and stuff like that. And so like, you know, I kind of saved up the money and got the BMW motorcycle. I hadn't been anywhere, but like it was my way of kind of like getting that explorer that I wanted to be, getting a little bit closer to that, because I felt like I was so far away from it.
Yeah.
And so realistically, you know, it could have been a Land Rover, but it would have been way more expensive. But basically, it's just about kind of like being able to get to almost sort of purchase your way to where you'd like to be a little bit. And similarly, you know, with artists, this is true. Like, so, you know, there are times where we feel rebellious, or we want to be like, you know, geared up before a game or something like that, or like, you know, all these kind of myriad of emotions. And we know we have a palette of artists that we know to go to. And when we want to feel a certain thing, we know where to go. We know that those guys can get to it immediately and unlock that emotion in a couple of
yes. I feel like you could imagine that you would feel differently riding a BMW motorcycle versus a Harley Davidson motorcycle.
Yeah.
If you're looking to feel a certain way, those very similar products, maybe, you know, I don't know much about motorcycles, but like they make it, you know, they represent different ideas and feelings. And
sometimes like a good example is where, you know, you could obviously, you know, a motorcycle head could argue day and night about the differences between a Harley and a BMW. But, you know, sometimes, you know, branding comes mostly into play when you have products that are incredibly similar. So take bottled water. Bang on cue. Look at
that. You're listening,
that was not even planned. That was amazing. So yeah, bottled water, where functionally the product is pretty similar. So then it's really about kind of, you know, you have to kind of invest quite a lot in the brand in order to try and describe the differences between, say, your smart water or your Fiji water or your Kroger's Finest purified.
Yes.
But yeah, so
you're definitely saying something about yourself if you spend extra money to buy this, you know?
Well, yeah, it's something like you keep it on the shelf to use for your guests rather than eat. Which says a lot of like you're trying to impress your guests, but you're not going to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But actually, no, it's a really good example of like, you know, you know, we buy these brands in order to convey to ourselves that we are the sort of person that drinks Fiji water, for example.
Right.
But we're also using it to convey to other people that I'm the sort of person that has Fiji water in the house.
Yes, exactly. Which is why we bought that like 2 years ago and haven't drank it. One example that I'm looking forward to diving into these common mistakes, but I feel like you're the one that taught me this or shared this with me, but I always love looking at Red Bull, the brand, as an example where, you know, Red Bull uses their brand to, you know, make you think that by consuming a sugary, caffeinated beverage, you're somehow living at the fringes of human performance. And the way they do this is like sponsoring all those fringe, you know, whether it's Formula One or it's one example that I saw them, a piece of content they did was someone was parachuting. They parachuted a bike. What are those things called? Like a half pipe. They pushed that out of a plane and had the guy doing tricks on the half pipe as it parachuted down. Like you like those are the types of feelings and ideas that Red Bull connects itself with, so that, and if you look at the Red Bull account, there's almost never, like, obviously they have the logo and they have it's identified as Red Bull content, but they don't have the drink there. Their product, the thing that they're selling, isn't even there. They're selling you really on an idea that, you know, by consuming their product, you're you are a certain thing.
Right. And so it becomes just sort of very clear by association that, Red Bull are always, at the X Games or like snowboarding or like anything that's sort of like is extreme or dangerous that we would find quite intimidating, perhaps. That's where they want to be associated, like the extremes of performance and there is a product truth that they can sort of come back to in the sense that Red Bull has taurine and a lot of sugar and caffeine, so it's sort of like makes you perform better. But they're basically extrapolating it and making it sort of so exaggerated that it becomes abundantly clear that this is about sort of like I need to be up, I need to be like able to do something death-defying. I need to be able to jump out of a spaceship, right? Hot air balloon from space or what have you, or motorcycle across the Grand Canyon or something,
right?
So basically they communicate that very, very consistently, and you'll see that like also at those ones, there's Monster there as well, but you don't see them as prevalently perhaps because they probably don't have quite as much budget. So they're also kind of bullying like the competition out of the market as well a little bit. Which is kind of interesting to see. Yeah.
All right, you want to dive into these 5 common mistakes?
Yeah, so basically this is just kind of trying to kind of whittle down from what I've seen over my years with kind of working with artists, having moved to Nashville. What I sort of think are the most kind of useful, basic mistakes that I see that are absolutely understandable mistakes. They're not sort of, they're not crimes against branding by any stretch of the imagination. They happen all the time. But they're things that, would be best to avoid, especially if you're an indie artist as well.
Right.
Number 1 is following the leader. So basically, if you're sort of chasing trends or just sort of looking at artists that are making billions, if you're looking at sort of Beyonce's and Taylor Swift's and things like that and just being like, oh, maybe I can just do a little bit of that. Or again, if it's sort of, a Morgan Wallen or something like that, if you're just basically trying to do a version of that, then it's never really going to kind of work. Like, I always feel like, say Nashville, for example, and obviously this is true of any market really. But, being able to sing, being able to be, a great performer, what have you, or a great guitarist or what have you, gives you a table stake. You get to be there. Yeah. But then it's about, but what have you got next? Right. And then if you are basically just sort of like a slightly diluted version of, I don't know, Olivia Rodrigo or something, then like it's unlikely that you're going to cut through to another level because, we already have Olivia Rodrigo. We don't need another one. Right. She's doing a great job of that. So basically, you kind of have to, not sort of dilute yourself down to be a slightly paler version of an existing thing. And we'll come on to like how do you get around that. But then also like following the leader in terms of like in strategy as well. I see that a lot of the time people kind of like do the same sort of methodologies that they would do if they're in a major label, and realistically, that game was defined by those major labels. So you are playing them at their own game, and you don't have nearly the amount of tools available that they do. So you're a military man.
Yes.
I think it's isn't it true that if you know that your army has a certain kind of power or strength, then you would kind of work around it. But if you don't have that, then you have to do something else. So you can't play them at their own game because you'll definitely lose.
Right.
So you have to do something differently. You have to be a little bit more inventive. You have to be a little bit more unexpected.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's a strength of independent artists too, is that they can
Absolutely.
stay flexible and kind of yeah, I don't know. They can be the most specific version of themselves because I always feel like I look at commercial country and there feels like there are market sectors that labels try to fill, even competing amongst themselves. They're trying to fill like the Carrie Underwood archetype or the rocker chick archetype.
Yeah.
But you don't really have to play by those rules as an independent artist. There's only one of you, and you can be the most extreme expression of that.
Absolutely. And I think that, that's the beauty of it, is that you don't have to play by the rules. It's almost like one way of thinking about it is that, those guys are like, oil tankers that take forever to turn around and move the whole team and whatnot. It takes, forever for them to even sort of slow down. Whereas you can pivot immediately. You're like a small ship that bobs over a massive wave, to sort of, you can absolutely turn around and change, try something different. As long as it's kind of like within your kind of brand world, your sort of defined path, then like you can try everything and do something that would be impossible for, a major sort of label to do, and really like try and enjoy that. Because actually, there'll be more upside on the back end for independent artists, like massively more, by not having given away all of the kind of, the shares of the content, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a massive advantage if you can play it to your advantage.
Something I feel like I noticed when I have been an independent contractor or thrown on a label team is, I've seen this over and over again where artists, there's so many chefs in the kitchen that they just start to like lose themselves and even go a little crazy. I feel like, because they're trying to process all of the things that they feel like, what the label is saying that they should do, what they feel like they should do, and like they're trying to like kind of create some sort of version of that, and it's maddening, and I think it ultimately like doesn't feel authentic, and the audience can identify that immediately.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, it was I think I had a similar sort of experiences really of being in rooms with so many people, so many chefs, and not really understanding what each and everyone's role was, and to what degree we should be valuing X opinion over Y opinion. And to a certain degree that exists in the corporate world as well. You have your kind of ad agency, your digital marketing agency, and then the marketing team and the overall client and like, there's a lot of people in the room sometimes. And so it is a bit about navigating that. But it like, by an artist knowing exactly what their brand is and what they want to communicate and having kind of put the work in, that allows them to call the shots, and also gives them a confidence that they don't have to rely on this guy who's got no skin in the game other than upside. Like he can move on to the next artist and be like, it never worked out because of but like if the artist takes ownership a bit, like, well, no, this is exactly what we're going to do, and this is the playbook team, here we go, then that empowers the artist to really have control, have ownership, and to call the shots. And that's really important. And actually, that's the second point, really. It comes neatly segues into the next point.
Perfect.
Which is next major mistake is not doing the work up front. So not knowing what you want to communicate will put you in a situation like that, where you will end up in a room with everyone chiming in and just saying like, oh, did you see that thing that so-and-so did? Maybe we should do that. Which is the worst place to be. So you need to understand the underlying reasons of why the world needs your brand, and how are you going to communicate that, and you need to kind of start to build a world that we can emotionally connect to as fans, as an audience.
I feel like I hear that a lot from even different content marketing people, but what do you feel like creating a world? What does that mean tangibly, or
what that means is really is basically, it's being able to create a place that we go to in our mind when we think of you as an artist. I've sort of done a lot of time in research groups where you can show people a series of kind of images and some words, and then ask them to extrapolate that into, okay, imagine this this set of images and words is a planet or a house. Describe to me what this house is and how does it feel? What do you see when you go inside it? And actually, it sounds like it's quite a sort of creative exercise, but actually, like, people are incredibly intuitive at being able to do that. So if you are bringing to them a set of imagery, a set of words, a set of sounds, in artists' cases, especially with artists, because you've got this emotional kind of language that's so central to your product, that isn't necessarily true of like a toothpaste or something. Like, it's very hard to get emotionally connected to that. Whereas like with music, absolutely, it's incredibly easy. So actually, you've got an advantage there where basically you can get us to emotionally go to a place in our mind. And so, it does sound pretty lofty and wafty to say like, oh, build a world. But like essentially what that is really just sort of having a brief in your mind of what that place looks like that you would like this particular project of yours to envisage.
What are ways that we can arrive at knowing what our brand is?
So obviously, from my perspective, like, putting the work in by doing, essentially like a brand workshop, someone like myself, but also, I know that we've been developing together some quick and free tools that people can get going with that'll give them a really good step in the right direction. I think it's really about sort of creating some definitions of what you want this world to be that you're creating, where you feel like what's the sort of honest personality that you're trying to kind of convey, and what's the sort of the reason behind it, really, I guess.
Right.
Knowing kind of
something that you turned me onto, and I've been using in my work with clients doing content, is brand archetypes. Feels not necessarily like the 100% solution of creating the world building and creating a brand position for an artist, but feels like an excellent start. It's a great start because it's kind of like a shorthand. It's like a pigeonhole that we can start to, add nuance to. But essentially, if you're building from a place that is commonly understood by everyone, then that helps to give a massive head start. You're not kind of like trying to inform people about new things is like the hardest thing in branding. And so basically, if you can kind of work with what they already know to be true, which we, over the course of years, we've sort of established this kind of lexicon of ideas and sort of meaning. So like, for example, someone walks in off a Harley Davidson in a leather jacket, smoking a cigarette, and, with, Doc Marten boots on or something like that. Like, we know they're probably some sort of outlaw rebel kind of, right.
vibe, basically. And so like we have these common associations that are like, sort of like, benchmarks that we can work with. But we're not sort of trying to pigeonhole anything with those kind of archetypes. It's really about just sort of working with what people commonly understand already. And then we create a special set of nuance for you. There's so many different combinations. Yeah. And it means that we can, quickly define and quickly communicate to other people exactly what you are. Yeah. And that's kind of, in today's economy, you really just don't have much time to be able to kind of explain very much. So,
yeah, I know it's been important to both of us as we work with independent artists to meet them where they're at with budget. One of the reasons we developed the brand archetype quiz was just like a quick and easy way to like find initial brand positioning, do the work up front, like you said. But it, from my perspective, is so worth taking the time to do a workshop with someone like James because what I've seen with it for artists that have done a workshop with James, or for an artist that just spends any amount of time really thinking about this stuff, is when you define your brand positioning, so much creativity begins to flow out of that. You would think maybe, okay, well, if I limit myself, then I won't have as much to say. And I really have found the opposite to be true, where when you're like, these are the things that I care about, this is who I am, this is who I'm not, you start to have a million different ways or ideas around how to express that through content, in colors, in
Absolutely.
logos, in the way that you're
photography, and all of the kind of like tools that are available for you to communicate. It's basically building yourself a brief to know objectively whether you're doing it right. Creativity can feel pretty random, and it can be, do I like that logo? I don't know. I mean, maybe I do, maybe I don't. It reminds me of something else. I don't know. Like, it's really sort of difficult to subjectively evaluate stuff if you don't know what you're evaluating it against, essentially. So you have to have a brief in order to objectively say, does it communicate X, Y, Z? Does this photography communicate the same thing?
Right.
And if it does, then it's right. And so it just takes the guesswork out of everything. Yeah. It takes the sort of, and you can hope that intuitively you get it, but also you've got to hope that, say you're working with a social media team or something like that, you've got to hope that they get the same communication. If you haven't got the brief that you can show them and say, this is the brief, then they can run with it. Yeah. And quite often, creativity also likes to have sort of barriers in a way, because it gives you something to push against. And so you really need, it's quite nice to be able to say, okay, well, we're not going to be this, but we can be this. And so how far can we go with this? It really actually helps to give constraints for creativity. The blank sheet of paper can be quite intimidating for anyone who's working on any brand.
Right.
But if you're given a brief, then you've got a load of things to start running with. You've got to start sparking ideas.
Yes.
And so that's really what essentially building your brand is building the brief. And it can, obviously, for artists, something unique to them is that you have, it can be for this project, but you can reinvent for the next project.
Yeah. Look at Taylor Swift. She's a great example of that.
Taylor Swift does it phenomenally well. And we can track her through the architypes.
Yeah, she's wonderful. Bouncing all over that.
But she has a tactic for it. She doesn't. She's said that she wants to reinvent. She feels like as a female artist, she has to turn up and be new each time, especially in pop. And so this is a deliberate tactic, and it's working very, very well. But I think the underlying part, the kind of value system, is something that stayed very, very consistent, whereas the personality kind of moves around and is like, we're showing different sides of personality, which we all have. And we go with her on that journey because we trust her kind of underlying value.
It's interesting when you start to dive into this branding world, to start to see the signs in a lot of successful artists. And you told me recently that you'd seen Beyonce's dad interviewed on the BBC. What did he say in that interview?
So he was saying how he used to do branding work with Xerox and Philips and Johnson & Johnson, and so he came from a very corporate branding world, and then kind of was thrust into managing Destiny's Child, and it turned out pretty well. But he says that he was just coming at it from a kind of, well, this is the corporate sort of branding and sales world that I know. So why don't we just do it that way and see how that goes? And turned out pretty well.
Yeah. A lot of the artists that we know of have done this work. Like they've put in the time to define their brand. What was it? So what's the third mistake?
Third mistake is sort of building off that again, is sort of when it comes into the execution, is sort of thinking billboard rather than mood board. I think back in the day, it was probably a little bit easier to kind of like have that, photo shoot by Mario Testino and spend all that money on that one amazing cover art that would go on billboards everywhere. And it would just have to pepper people with the same image over and over and over again. But, these days it's a mood board. It's social media. That's, you can't just put up the same picture over and over and over and over again. I mean, it wouldn't really sort of work in that format. So you've got to be able to kind of, again, build a bigger picture than just that one key image. For artists that are on budgets, I quite often say, like, rather than putting all your money into that one shoot, I would suggest you try and kind of build a bigger catalog, maybe working with different photographers, but as long as you've given them the brief from the same place, so having done that brand work up front, give it to different creative outlets with lower budgets and get more content, but they're all coming from the same brief, and that's the most important thing. So each photographer is going to have a different angle on it, but that's the beauty of the creativity, is that you know that it's come from the same place, but you're going to end up with a much bigger picture, a much broader picture, much more kind of language to be able to work with. You'll have a bigger toolkit.
I feel so. You're saying mood board, not billboard?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like one way I've talked about this with clients is ideas over visuals. And not that the visual isn't necessarily important, but like everything has to go back to the idea that you're trying to express. And especially as you enter a release cycle, you're toying with a couple different ideas from the music. There are certain themes from the album or EP or string of singles that you're communicating, and like you can express those ideas a million different ways. You can express them in really low budget ways and still communicate them effectively.
Definitely. Yeah. And actually, I think you see it more and more really is that, it's less about the sort of like the high polish of everything. It's more about, does the idea come across? And I think that's something that, essentially TikTok kind of brought to the table, was that actually, maybe we don't need everything to be slick. Do we get the idea or not? Does the, communication idea come through? Even if it is sort of in a slightly low budget way, I think, but also you kind of, that's the sort of reaction against very highly polished things that we were seeing on Instagram at the time. But now, that sort of authentic marketplace is becoming quite saturated as well. So, it does kind of ebb and flow naturally. So I think there's probably, again, it's like a toolkit. Like, sometimes you can do the high polished stuff. Sometimes you can do the low and authentic and gritty, no budget stuff. And it's sort of like the best idea wins, really. And I think you see that with I'm sure artists see that with their own, social media numbers, that things that they didn't think much of ended up doing better than the things that they'd worked really hard on. So sometimes you just never know.
Very true.
But as long as it's all communicating the same kind of core fundamentals, then it's all valuable, basically.
Yeah. Awesome.
So then next up, kind of again leading off of that, is really sort of like, it's almost like method acting. So be that brand. So that, again, once you define what that brand is, you should embody that brand. You should be a poster child, a character from the film of this brand. It's sort of like getting a bit Wes Anderson with it and thinking like curating things that would be in the world of this brand. Yeah. And so, every interaction that you have, even if it's just like turning up for a sound check, people, the organizer, the booker will see you, the sound engineer will see you. They'll all be relaying a story of, I work with that brand, I work with that artist. When I saw them, they were like, so basically making sure that every single interaction is really important. In branding, we talk about something called an imprint, and an imprint is usually like the first impression. Yeah. And if the first impression is wrong, it's really hard to turn that around, because people kind of solidify that first impression, and you have to spend a lot of time and energy moving it like away from that if it's the wrong one. So just make sure that first impression, whatever it is, make sure that first impression is right. So if you are just living that brand, if it's come from an authentic place, that's going to be a lot easier. But just, embody that brand. Think about the detailing of that brand. What is the props that work with that brand? What are the, just try and sort of like method act it, basically. Yeah.
I feel like you can almost reverse engineer it too. Is like I just talked to a talent manager for content creators, and you have to have an established brand position so that it makes sense for a brand to collaborate with you. Like, what in this character, in this world that you're building, the character that you're becoming, what shoes does he wear? What shirts does he wear? When you look at Luke Combs, that's very clear. He's definitely a guy that would wear, what are those sandals called?
They're like Birkenstock things. Or...
Yeah, man, I'm blanking. I'm ruining these. Anyways, that and a fishing shirt, He's He's his brand, the Everyman brand is down south. That's what they wear. They're looking for
the Bass Pro. Those sort of like association, and that's incredibly useful as well from the point of view of like, if you're working with a manager and they're trying to get sponsorship deals. Right. Again, like the more clearly that a brand can see. Because it's a risk to them to go with an artist, because, you could say something really controversial. You could, throw something off the top of a Broadway. So, like, it's a bit of a risk. So, like, they have to be able to show to their bosses who may not be, like, incredibly literate with this stuff. Like, I think we should work with these guys. Like, doesn't it look like our brand? And so that's what how they're gonna pitch it. So, and how you're gonna pitch it to them, and how they're gonna be able to pitch it to their boss. Yeah. So the clearer it is to everyone, the more of a chance you've got.
One thing I feel like I share, I wouldn't get your take on this, but like I share this with clients pretty often, is like, the percentages on this are always a little different sometimes, but like the brand that you're building is probably not a 100% expression of who you are. It's not an expression of every single thing that you are.
That's a very good point.
It may even be like look at Taylor Swift's example. When she enters the Reputation era, if that's only, I'm sure she's not walking around. Maybe she was more often than not at that time period, but she's not walking around in like full on rage mode 24/7. But that is the expression of where her brand was at. So maybe an attitude or feeling that she had 5% of the time is what became 100% of her brand in that season.
Yeah, and I think that's, what she's doing there is sort of, she's a phenomenal songwriter. So she's articulating what was important to her when she was writing those songs and where that was coming from at that particular time, at that particular moment in time. And, but then it changes, she goes from Reputation to Lover, and it's like suddenly everything changes. Yeah. So you've got to, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be as the brand, it's not all the things you are as a person. And actually, it's really important to be able to disassociate. I think actually, I was talking with someone the other day and I think Tom Petty initially thought it was really weird when he was watching David Bowie, trying to sort of understand, like, why does he do all these characters? I don't understand, like, why doesn't he just be himself? It's so much easier just to be yourself. Which kind of tallies with like what we know.
What Tom Petty,
but then, later on, Tom Petty found it quite a burden that it was him as the brand in a way. He sort of was a little bit jealous of these other people that had these kind of personas that they could jump into, and jump out of, whereas it was always him.
Right.
So I think, it's sometimes useful for people to be able to step into a character, and think of it as such, where, in this particular moment of time with this particular project, this is like the key parts that need to come across. But then when you step away from the stage and you're home, what have you, you don't obviously, there's the method acting, but also it's just sort of knowing that that's a character you step into. And also you don't have to be like kind of, it doesn't have to be all the things that you are.
Right.
And you don't need to communicate all the things that you are.
Right. Again, to go back to the blank page, like I feel like it can feel overwhelming creatively to try to just like fit all of who you are into everything that you're doing all the time. Like,
absolutely not. It's been mind blowing. And
it's I think too important to note that, like, whatever you are expressing in that character, it doesn't mean that that's not authentic. Like, that is you. It's just not maybe all of you.
Yeah, it's a snapshot of where you were, like, where you were at with this particular project, and then it can change for the next one,
right?
If you want it to, or it can stay the same.
Can you think of another another example? It doesn't even necessarily have to be an artist, but just of a brand that does a good job of, like, entering this world or their world.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I had a phone call.
No worries. Can you think of an example, whether it doesn't even necessarily have to be an artist, that, or just a brand that has, like, done a good job of this?
Of being able to sort of articulate one particular part of themselves.
Right. Or and world build around that.
I mean, obviously, Taylor Swift massively springs to mind because she's done so many different articulations. It really, what she's been able to do is sort of, define through those projects, literally eras, I guess, and really sort of articulate where those songs were coming from at any one time. I'm trying to think on a kind of corporate level. An interesting example that I worked on was where a brand was sort of they not positioned quite right, I guess, was with Jack Daniels, actually. So with Jack in the kind of rest of the world, they were finding that there were certain markets where it just had sort of naturally positioned itself into slightly strange places. And so I think it was in India. Jack Daniels was seen as the sort of like the pinnacle end of the night drink, like kind of after all the champagne, after all the vodka or what have you at the nightclub, then it's all about, the Jack Daniels pinnacle celebration moment at the end of the night. And everyone was like, I'm not sure if we can really sustain that. Because I think once they find out all of these other things that are way more flashy than we are, then it just doesn't really sort of align with where we're at. And so for them, it was kind of like having to kind of move it, although it was being successful, it was sort of like, well, yeah, but it's probably short term that's going to be successful, but other players are going to come into this market and do a better job of that. Yeah. And then also if they ever travel to, Europe or the States, they're just going to get a different read on it entirely. Another good example actually is Carhartt. In the UK, during university, it was like the most trendy skater brand that you could get in the UK. And I came over here and it's like farmwear. And I was like, oh, okay. But now it's actually kind of going into that sort of trendy area now as well. So like, it's sort of like where those kind of, positioning start to kind of misalign across markets. And I guess nowadays, like, it kind of has to be consistent around.
Yeah, maybe if you're not communicating that brand and brand positioning consistently, then your audience almost kind of does it for you. Like they are in charge of positioning you instead of you positioning yourself and having like a choice in what that looks like.
Exactly, yeah. Because if you don't really give them anything to work with, then they don't like the idea that they don't know what it is or don't get it, because it makes them feel stupid. So they will sort of latch onto the first thing they can think of. And like we talked about with the imprint, it's very hard to change that if that's not something that you kind of curated to be generally in the right direction of what you wanted to talk about.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of important.
Awesome. What's the fifth and final?
Fifth and final is making sure, like, it's basically, I've called it inform, educate, and entertain, which are actually the values of the BBC. But actually, I think they're incredibly true of basically consistently making content, especially on social media. So the main part, I think, that I see with artists is that sometimes social media doesn't come naturally to them. Maybe they're not naturally kind of gravitating towards it, and that's fine. But I'd say it's a pretty broad church. And so actually what you can do is make it fun for yourself. And that will kind of gravitate across, that will communicate across. So if you're making it fun for yourself, you're more likely to do it consistently. You're more likely to do it. So rather than kind of building it into this monster, where you're kind of like, oh God, what am I going to do? What am I going to post about today? It's just making it fun for yourself. Think about the content that you engage with, that you find fun. And if social media is not part of your brand, all power to you. I mean, that may be part of your positioning. So you got to find another way of communicating, but you kind of have to communicate somehow to build the audience, right? So, but yeah, so it's basically about thinking about how you can entertain through the platform, and then if you're constantly just selling stuff, it's not gonna. People don't tend to react well to that. So it's more about kind of, again, building a picture, showing us a way into this world that we can engage with, and just making it fun.
Yeah, I feel like an almost like an indicator or canary in the coal mine of like what your brand should be is what you gravitate towards. And so say what feels funnest to you is kind of being humorous or satirical and so you incorporate the jester archetype into your brand positioning, or say that you
so it's explorer, and so like it might be travel, it might be to going to incredible places, showing us incredible things that we've never seen, like pushing our boundaries, and obviously that can be literally exploring, or it could be on a different way, in a creative way, perhaps.
Whatever comes most natural to you to inform, educate, and entertain, then maybe that's an indicator of the type of brand positioning that your brand should live in. Definitely,
and that it'll give you some clues, but obviously, like as we were going back to the beginning, is sort of don't copy. It's about knowing your brief, and then you can look at content that does really well or engages you really well, and think, but if I did it through the lens of my brand, like if I did it through how this character would explore that, then that's going to be the way to do it. So hopefully that's been sort of helpful to be able to kind of explain
in summary
some branding basics.
In summary, you worked on a Grammy award-winning album campaign, CeCe Winans, Let Them Fall in Love. In your work on that album and in the ensuing content or visuals and stuff that came out of what ultimately was part of a Grammy award-winning album, like what sort of things do you feel like you guys did well? Two Grammys. Wow. That's being corrected.
But I'm not claiming any of that.
I that's fair. I do feel like, just to give you a little bit of credit, I do feel like being able to communicate that effectively in a way that's relevant, maybe for that artist in today's world, is helpful, and she's she's won like 17 Grammys, so it's not like it's not like an unusual thing for her to win a Grammy.
No, that's fair. Yeah.
I don't know. Just tell us about that. Working on that project, what do you feel like you guys are able to do well, that just to counter, bounce off of like maybe stuff that you shouldn't do? Like what stuff that you did well, you feel like in that?
Yeah, I think that was a really fun project because, it was kind of, again, it was like gospel space, which I don't really know much about. It's not necessarily a wheelhouse I knew much about. So it was really fun for me to kind of dive into, that market and that world and just be like, okay, what's going on in this world? Like, what are we seeing here? What are the kind of, the semiotics? What are the cues? Like, what are, sort of enveloping myself with all of the things around it. And then being able to kind of, we're talking to CeCe and Alvin, her son, who's the sort of producer on the project. They basically were in a position where they hadn't released anything for about 7 years or so. They felt like they needed to kind of re-engage with an audience, and maybe, this project was felt to be quite different. So they wanted to kind of find new audiences as well.
Yeah.
So they wanted to do sort of a bit of a revolution rather than evolution. And we were basically able to identify what was true about the project, true about CeCe, and what we wanted it to achieve. What was the purpose of this particular project? And then from that, we're able to kind of build, again, the world. Basically, you've got to be able to build that. What does that world look like? How do we bring that across? And
what color is it? What font is it?
What's the sort of the photography that we're going to use, and the styling and the typography and the and that then travels into merch and website and all the things basically. But if you can't sort of start with an execution, you always have to start with the kind of the core ideas of the whole thing, and then everything else trickles down from that. And that's what they did incredibly well. And her team was able to kind of execute that very, very well, and it worked out fantastically. And so it was great to see. It also was great for their confidence, because they knew that they were coming back to an audience, and they didn't know. They were just sort of a little bit nervous about it. And this, by being able to sort of like have all of that working behind the scenes, they knew that what they were communicating was exactly what they wanted to communicate. They didn't have to be tentative and being like, "Ooh, maybe we're going to annoy some people." It was like, no. Just be confident with it, but do it, true to what you were envisaging. Yeah. And then go from there, basically.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing all this with us, taking the time today to speak to independent artists. If someone wanted to get in touch with you to do a workshop or get more information about what that would look like, where would you want them to reach out to?
They can reach out to, they could go to my website, jamesmuriel.com, or they can talk to your good self, and we can kind of put both of our heads together on how to kind of get the brand positioned, articulated, and then all the wonderful executions that we can bring into strategy and content after that.